So this is really a 2-mile route that I'm setting off by the up at the airport where the sort of the cold well is, and that runs down into the valley that runs into the stream in the bottom of the valley there, that runs parallel with Scotland Lane. We don't actually spend much time on Scotland Lane. That's why sometimes it's the value of a video. You can see these areas that you can't see unless you're walking on them, but they're all public footpaths down there. So that's where I'm setting off from. So this is the sort of a map of it. Setting off up here near Hawthorne Farm is where the stream rises. You can just see that over there towards the end of the to the runway then, and you can see it flowing down here and then joining what's various calls Moseley Beck and lower down Oil Mill Beck, and it's got other streams joining it as well, coming from Bramhope and from, as you can see down here, joining it from the Cookridge side of the valley. So starting up here, then going down to Dean Head, where there used to be a mill down there, and only the cottages remain of that. And then coming along, like I say, on Google Maps, I can only draw really along Scotland Lane. But then we're coming down through the fields to Oaks Farm, then we're coming along across to Dean Grange Farm, and dropping down to where the railway tunnel is there from the Bramhope tunnel, and then coming up to see where the waterworks are up here, and then coming down to the Oaks Farm down here. Sorry, not Oaks Farm, the Owlet farm, and I'll probably stop there about today. And then there's another bit down here. There's Moseley Bottoms down here, where there's used to be a paper mill down there. There's not much to see of that. And then further on, there's Ling Bob Farm, there's Beach House, and then coming down to the railway station. And lastly, I come up Station Road and finish at Trinity All Saints University. So it's sort of a sort of loop round looking at North Horsforth, really. But like I said, not spending much time on Scotland Lane at all. So I'll try not to, it's very rural as well, but obviously got the planes flying over your head and other sort of extraneous noises, but it's the airplanes that can say, when you come where the waterworks is, they nearly touch your head as you come over there where the landing lights are. So let's have a look at the sort of, I'm just going to repeat a bit over sort of the bit of history and geology, because that's what I gave as an introduction, and it's hard for me to take the slides out and then I won't put them back in and things like that. So really the geology of it is, we've got two valleys on Horsforth. We've got the Woodside Valley that we're principally looking at, and it's really made up of sandstone and much harder millstone grit that was laid down around here. I'm going to say it's fairly high up here, not as high as Hunger Hills, which is 575 feet above sea level, but you know, it's the airport's up here, but it's one of the lowest airports in the country, or highest airports in the country, and suffers from fog, as we know. And then just coming on a little bit, just repeating myself from earlier, is that about the history of Horsforth, the early history of it. There's the cup and ring stone on the green, which is about 5,000 years old. And that probably came up from Hunger Hills top, because all the other cup and ring stones in Ilkley Moor, right across to Low Snowdon, which is on the road sort of Paisley Bridge outside of Otley, are all on tops of hills within sight of one another. And because that's displayed on the green. Then we have the coming of the Domesday Book 1086, and there are 3 entries for Horsforth, which sort of represent the 3 manors of Horsforth, one being, because these manorial farm, probably at Carveley Bridge, Newley Bridge, and at Low Fold. That's just opposite the Fleece on top of New Road side. Because a very small population around there, estimated to be probably around 50 people, so very, very small. But then what we see is coming really 2 periods in history that affected Horsforth, and both relate to Kirk's Abbey. One is the establishment of the abbey because they built between 1152 and 1182. They came to hold about 2/3 of the lands of Horsforth, and they had 3 granges here. So we see the site of 2 of them today. There's Owlet Grange and Dean Grange. The 3rd Grange they had was Newley Grange, down in the Newley area, that still stands today and as a house. And then, to say the second thing relating with Kirkstall Abbey was its dissolution in 1539. The lands were sold in 1566 to Lord Clinton and Lord Irby of Boston in Lincolnshire. They were basically land speculators and would have bought them off Queen Elizabeth I. They then sold them a few years later to 5 local families, the Cravens, the Stanhopes, the Greens, the Pollards and the Paslows. I guess they sort of shaped Horsforth early history, as we'll see in this area where it's principally the Cravens and the Greens who owned the land off Scotland Lane on this part of the valley that we're going to have a look at. So that's sort of the early history of it, because it hasn't particularly changed that much, but you're probably just noticing on this map, I don't know how well you can see it, but we're going to set off up here, and it does say Bloomingdale up here, largely because there's probably a bit of iron smelting around here at one time. That's the road that runs off Dean Lane, where there's some houses stood on the corner, that runs up to the back of Leeds Bradford Industrial Estate. That's where the Avro works were. I guess it's just a green lane today, but the farm is still on there. Further down here, just pointing out a couple of things, you can see where the reservoirs were on this map here. The golf club is in this area over here. The airport comes right across this area here. You can see here that it says Horsforth Common on it as well. So this is the area we're going to have a look at, principally coming to the starting off at the top up here, the Coldwell, where the water rises but runs down into the Beck at the bottom here, really the start of Moseley Beck coming around here. So this is the first short bit I'm going to look at. I'm going to set off at the Stoop Stone, which stands by the roundabout, which accesses into the airport. The Coldwell is a bit further down here, and this Stoop Stone obviously might have stood further where the well is, and then coming back down here onto Scotland Lane, where it meets Dean Lane. Dean Head goes straight forward as well, coming down and looking at that area. So let's have a look. This is the Stoop Stone that stood what we're going to call Horsforth Moor, but it's probably not its original position. We know, but it's changed position a number of times, largely because of movement around here. So this was last moved when they extended the runway up here, and it's now in this area around here. And so that was the last time, I think, in 1969 or something like that. But on the other side of that roundabout, where the Hawthorne Farm pub stands today, is really where the streams do start. The Carlton Beck comes down into this area. So this is the site of the Coldwell. You can see this Coldwell Farm over here, because that still exists. That Avro building stands around about here, got Coney Lodge Farm as well, and this is the track that leads up to it, but is still there as well. So it's really a far-flung corner of Horsforth, and this farm, was first mentioned in 1575 up here, and probably established there because of the water coming down the Beck, coming down here as well, is what they need for animals, and probably taken in a bit of a moor up here as well. So this is really the end of Horsforth itself, and so let's have a look at this first piece of film so you can actually see this site up there, which is you've got to come up this track here to access this around here. So this is a bit of film that I made with Alan in about 2006 or something like that. This is a shortest bit to begin with, so this is just a 2-minute section of that.
I'm sat here today on what is known as Coldwell Beck, otherwise known as Carlton Beck. This beck flows from here down into the valley and joins up with other streams all the way down till it falls into the River Aire. We're trying to film the valley and tell its industrial history as well as its social history from this point onwards. This looks as though it's the site of the Cold Well, which the farm was named after, which possibly was on the site just below here. Cold Well Farm. Hence where we've just been is Cold Well Beck. But now further down it becomes Carlton Beck.
And then we're coming down onto Scotland Lane at the bottom of White House Lane, where there's a bridge over the beck. There aren't many bridges really around here. This is a traffic bridge anyway. There's this bridge here, and then really the next traffic bridge down is the bridge by the railway station. But there are a number of other little bridges down here. There's one at the end of Dean Head where it crosses over the stream. We'll see that. There's a bridge, Bay Horse Bridge it's called, that goes from Dean Grange Farm and crosses across to up into Cookridge. And then lower down is there's by Moseley Beck, just behind the railway station, or a good sort of maybe 10-minute walk up there. There's an actual pedestrian bridge over a big, large gantry type bridge over the railway line down there as well. So that's the sort of story of the bridges. I'm going to say we'll see most of those on the route down. So coming down here is that at this point here, there's quite a lot to see. There's Springfield House, which is that very large Victorian house that stands at the corner of White House Lane, just off it. Across the other side of the road, there's this redundant chapel that's nearly down to its foundations across down there. Over there, there's a sanatorium. And at the bottom of Dean Head's a private road, but you can actually walk down it. There's a flax mill down there, and there's a little bridge at the bottom where you can cross over the other side. I think it climbs up and comes out probably somewhere near High Trees Garden Centre around there. So let's have a look at these buildings down here. This is Springfield House. It was built in 1892, and there are various extensions onto it in 1906 and 1908. It was built for the Leeds Workpeople's Hospital Fund. So this was really a society that you'd have paid into weekly, and you could say, if you came ill, you'd have been sent out here. It originally had about 40 beds in here. It seemed to have closed in the 1950s because in the 1960s, or in 1960, the year itself, it was a private house in which a chap called Arthur Pearson lived. He wrote his memoirs here of his time in World War I. He served in the Leeds Pals under Captain George Whittaker. Captain George Whittaker lived at the end of Outward Lane. There's quite a big family of them there. They owned the quarries on the other side of the road from there. So he was sort of a very large man as well. I think he was about 6'7" tall or something like that. And he acted as a recruitment sergeant for the Leeds Pals, getting the numbers in there. He was quite a popular figure, it seems. And both of these men went over the top on the first day of the Somme on Saturday, July the 1st, 1916 at 7:30 in the morning, quite delayed, and it's quite light at that time, and they weren't very happy about going across there. And this is what Arthur Pearson put in his diary or memoirs. Most of number 11 platoon were hit kneeling on the parapet of a trench as they climbed out. The German machine gunners had the range to a nicety and simply mowed our men down like sickle grain. And that included Captain Whittaker, who straggled on for a few yards and was killed in that action, because he eyewitnessed by Arthur Pearson as well. He was detailed actually to go back the following year, and it's not really written in accounts of World War I, but a lot of these men, after sort of the action had taken, were sent back there to clear the battlefield of debris, and that included bodies and other things like that. Oddly is that the Leeds Pals were sent back to the same area of action, and a number of men, including Arthur Pearson, actually found Captain Whittaker's body. Like I say, I don't think there's much left of it because he says in his memoirs, but it's all placed in a sandbag. So he lived in this house at one time, then became a children's home, and then was empty for a number of years until 2020, when it was taken by a company called Xeros, and who still own it today. They design, develop, manufacture, and market medical devices. So these are largely surgical implants they do up here under the brand Neoligaments. So that's Springfield House. It's quite a sort of medical centre around up here as well. We'll see the house across the road being a sanatorium. But this over here is the site at the junction of Dean Head with Scotland Lane. This is where the a little Methodist chapel stood here as well. Because this was it was sort of a small hamlet that developed around here, around about 1790, with the building of the mill further down Dean Head. And because this was a small Methodist chapel, and it was built by the Pullen family. It was the Pullen family that owned the mill further down there, and maybe built around about 1870, 1880, or something like that. And I guess that if you wanted to work at the mill, it might have been better if you're a Methodist, and then you had to come to pray at the top here. It once had a pyramidical roof, I think I said that correctly, and because after it sort of as we'll see a bit later on, the mill came to an end around about World War One, but then it became quite popular for people on a weekend to come and have a stroll out, and used to come along Scotland Lane. And this then became the Copper Kettle Cafe, and say that probably lasted to the 1950s. And in the 1990s or early 1990s, maybe the late 1980s, the chap that lives in this house here, the modern house there, started to take the pyramidical roof down. And he did that because he didn't want to pay rates to Leeds City Council on the building. And then, as you can see there, is that the rest of it has sort of collapsed, or he's actually taken it down. But not quite visible on this photograph, or clearly on this photograph, but there are two round sort of pillars that stand either side of the door that would have led into the building itself. So there's very little of that left, which is quite sad, really, because it was quite a landmark building, because they right up until the 1990s when he took the tiles off that roof. Across the, so I'm going the wrong way, across the road from that chapel, because they're lying adjacent to Scotland Lane, or the end of that, is Dean Head Sanatorium. And because they probably built as a house to begin with, maybe for a mill manager or something like that. But in 1910, it opened as a sanatorium under Oliver Firth, so it was like a private one, and it was a tuberculosis sanatorium, and it was believed, you can see Springfield House in the background of this old photograph actually, and these huts were out in the garden or the field just behind it, facing across the road there, and it was believed that plenty of fresh air would help tubercular patients, and they were actually sort of had their beds in here and actually wheeled the beds out so they could sit outside there in the fresh air. And it closed around about 1926. It only had a very short time span in there, and was then converted into a private house. I think it's in two private houses. I've actually been in the bottom side of one there, but you'd never known it would have been in the sanatorium at any time. So let's go down Dean Head, down that private road to the bottom. Like I say, it's a public footpath, a public right of way, so you can walk down there. And in 1815, a mill was built down here by James Croft, and it was a woolen mill because there was great demand for cloth at that time. He probably built it at the wrong time, actually, because there was great demand for the French wars. Now, they came to an end about there, and I think that was his problem, really, is that there was a great a lack of demand, and there was also a tightening of money around the place right through to about 1820, 1821. And that's when we see the sort of demand rising again for cloth, and we'll see the bigger mills being built, especially in Bradford for that time. He went bankrupt in 1824, probably a result of all that. And then in the by the 1840s, it was owned by the Pullen family of Harrogate. They say Harrogate, but it's probably more likely to be from Knaresborough, because Knaresborough was a big linen centre of industry, and in fact it remains so right through to the sort of 1980s, that linen was produced in the mill down by the weir, really on the riverbank of the below the castle down there, and it's been converted into houses and apartments now. And so it was really Knaresborough being the centre of the sort of flax industry, linen industry, and it was a Pullen family that brought the lands around here. But it seems so that the mill, a flax mill, failed probably at the end of World War I or thereabouts, largely because is that although flax can be grown in Britain, it can't be grown in huge quantities, or not the quantities that were demanded in the linen mills. And so it had to be imported, and most of it came from the Baltic states. And the problem was it's a very bulky product and had to be transported obviously on lands and wagons and things like that to come to these mills. And in fact, it was a problem even in Knaresborough itself. They actually proposed building a canal from the River Ouse right across to Knaresborough, but that never happened. But a lot of other linen industry went because it was too remote from the transport network. And so it was also a very smelly industry, because you got to wet the plants in sort of urine and other chemicals and things like that to allow it to rot down, and then the fibres can be teased out from that. So we found a man who lived down here at the flax mill. I mean, he might still live down there, and who was bought one of these cottages and knew a little about the area as it stood in the 1950s. So here's an interview with this chap, with Alan down there.
Hello, Jeff. My name's Alan. I've come down here to meet a man called Geoffrey Wood, who knows more about this area than I do. So let's have a chat about it, Jeff. Right, Jeff, can you tell us a bit about this old bleach works that were here? Yes, I gather it was here, was it, somewhere?
It was just here. That was the middle of it. It ran right across there, right in front of all this row of houses.
Yeah.
These were the houses that the workers lived in. And the mill was here, and it had a row of pillars up the middle.
Can we go look at them, Jeff?
There were a round pillar about 2 feet across, and there was a whole row of these pillars which were there instead of a central wall.
Oh, yeah.
And that was the centre of the roof. The roof was like that, you see, with the gully in the middle where the pillars were.
Was it a single-storey building, Jeff, or two-storey, what do you know?
No, I think it was the same height as that, but I'm not sure. Yeah. Because it was down to a lower level than that when I came here.
What was it like when you came here?
Well, it was a ruin.
Was it?
It was a ruin. The roof was off and everything, yes. It had been in a state of ruin for some time.
So not a lot of it left, really?
Not a lot of it
apart from these pillars. But where did the water come in from about here?
Well, the water came out through pipes, I imagine, or sluices, but the dam had been drained many years before. By them, a man drained the dam after the two girls were
drowned. Oh, what about those two girls? You can give us an account of that now, what you know, anyway.
I don't know the date. What happened is the girls had to go to school in Yeadon, and they had to walk. There was no transport for them. They had to walk there, and they came back, and one of them went into the mill to see her mother, and the shafting was running. There was some power shafting running to drive the machinery, whatever it was, and she caught her arm in the belting, and it either it took her arm off or else her arm had to be amputated later. Well, she got better, and at a later date her sister fell into the dam, and although she only had one arm, she went in to try and save her sister, and they were both drowned.
And they lived in these cottages here?
They lived in these cottages as far as I know, but when the mill was working, all the employers had to go up to the chapel, as it was then.
Yeah, Wesleyan.
Yes, they had to go up the chapel and be preached to by
Mr.
the man,
Pullen.
the man who lived
right.
here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So he had a captive audience, you might say.
He had a captive workforce during the week and a captive congregation at the weekend.
We'll go look at the dam, but they had the springs down there, they had a flax mill down there that...
yeah, they belong to the same family.
Yeah, the Pullens used to live down there. Yeah.
But that's the dam.
Yeah, the banking.
Yes, that's the dam, and it's got, it's had a hole cut away in where the man drained it after the girls were drowned. But I don't know what year it was. But there were some other dams further up the Dean, and they were drained as well, so that they didn't get the aircraft, the German aircraft couldn't line them up onto the Avro factory.
I could have talked all day to Jeff, but I wanted to get down to the footbridge that crosses the beck and compare it with the old photograph we have from over 100 years ago with the little girl on the bridge. We've now come to the very bottom of Dean Head, past where the old bleach works was. I'm stood on the bridge. Behind me is a lovely canopy of spring green leaves on the trees and the blue of the bluebells on the bank. It must be about the same as it was in the days of the bleach works that was here. We know that this bridge has been altered. By the old photograph, the track goes more up that way towards the mill, and upstream there where it comes round more would have been the old crossing for the horse and carts going up to the mill. When Pullen built his house, he must have altered the track, but it's virtually on the same site as it was. From here we'll move down the valley towards Oaks Farm and Dean Grange.
So the next, as he said on that bit of film, the first of the farms really down here is Oaks Farm, and then the next one after that is Dean Grange Farm as well. So if you don't know this area very well, then there's a footpath comes off across the fields by Springfield House, and can say you can. I don't think you can park in that area anymore. It's probably all red double yellow lines, red, can't say red double yellow lines, but red pairs of lines around there where there's actually no parking at all. But so this is what it looks like, because there's sort of the rural areas of Horsforth, because people don't really go around. So this is a bit of film going from the sort of sanatorium end, then across to Oaks Farm, and then just onto the top of Dean Grange Farm. Leaning
across and looking down onto Oaks Farm, lower down in the valley here. In this little coppice at the back, there's a small delve, a stone quarry, from which was taken the stone for the farm buildings and dry stone walls. We are now coming across from Oaks Farm and down to Grange, the home of the Inghams, who were farmed here for hundreds of years. Originally, it was a sheep farm, a sheep grange for Kirkstall Abbey. And just before I get down to the farm, we come to the old ice house. This, in the old days, was the way they used to preserve the food, probably meat and fish, long before fridges. And this one is probably the oldest one that's left in Horsforth, as far as we know. So I'm on my way to introduce ourselves to the Ingham family. Look at their lovely elderflower. This year they're very prolific of the elderflowers. And the foxgloves, the tall stately foxgloves, lining the wall all the way down. Beautiful, full of bees. A lovely way down to the farm.
This is where we've come down to at the moment, the ice house here. It's got lanes running along the top there. And I say you can walk down this track as well, down to Grange, and walk through the complex of the farm down here, and then down a track then that goes across the Bay Horse Bridge where Bramhope Tunnel is, and goes up the other side and comes out near where the rugby club is. I think it's the old Modernians at the side of Cookridge up there. So that's where that comes out. You can see where Caring for Life is as well. I think there's a track path that leads across there. And you can see here the path that I'm going to follow further down the valley, coming off Grange Farm there. So they're all, you can walk all over this area. So the ice house is there, then coming down to the farm itself and coming down this track to see the Nether Spring, where Horsforth Water used to be bottled, and the other flax mill down here, and then just coming down to look at the Bramhope Tunnel as well. So that's the ice house we've already seen. This is the Grange farm. This farmhouse dates from 1785, and it's run by the Ingham family since that date, and the two brothers still run that today. And it used to be a dairy farm, but really there's two things that sort of scuppered it really. Is in 2001, we had the foot and mouth crisis, and they used to sell their milk to Arla. And then Arla said they weren't going to come and do daily collections, but which meant that if they're going to come 2 or 3 times a week, they'd have to cool the milk and store it at the farm. And that put a lot of the smaller farmers, I think they had a herd of something like 75 dairy cows around here, but I think they decided that it really wasn't worth it. But the investment in that sort of cooling and storage facility they would have to have here, because I understood is that you needed at that time really about 125 milking cows to make it break even. And so they decided to go out of the dairy business, I think about 2004, and now they've gone into suckler cows around here, so breeding beefed cows and then selling them on down at the market, because they've owned the farm outright since 1956. So let's go down the track down here. This is the one that you come round the corner here and then down the track. It's quite an uneven rutted track. And then we come to first of all, I've got a bit of film here as well, but I'll just talk you through it first. Is that this was the Nether Spring in the sort of Georgian period. Spa towns became very popular, and because then the bottling of this water, because a lot of polluted water was around, and if it came from a clear spring, then you'd have a market for it, similar to with the Harrogate water, what they were doing with it at the time. And but this water was probably bottled up here around about 1840, and probably only had a very short life of a few years. But you can see there that there's a glass bottle that's owned, dug up, as it says on a bit of film, in this vicinity. And I think there's a bottle in the Horsforth Museum as well. And so moving further down here, as we'll see on the film, with these other bleach works as well. This was all part of Pullen's empire as well. So the same people who had it up at Dean Head as well. And so this was established around 1860, so presumably they're using the water when the Nether Spring was no longer needed for that, or it probably didn't make any financial sense to do that. And to say the first buildings you can see here on this old photograph were built in stone, and sort of bits of that still exist. It's very overgrown today, and the red brick building we see here and the chimney behind were built in 1871. They employed around about 70 people here. So that building there is still exists today. It belongs to Dean Grange Farm, so one of the Ingham's brothers lives in that to this day. And again, this probably came to an end around about the end of World War One. And because the buildings are now ruinous. It's a pity, really, because it looked as though they've been very sort of convertible, really, down there. But that's how they look, and like I say, they've probably even decayed even more over the last year. Going down that track, then the Bay Horse Bridge is called Bay Horse because when they came to build the Bramhope Tunnel, and we see the Horsforth end of it here, between 1845 and 1849, really 2,300 men worked on digging and blasting along here. And so they would have lived up here in wooden huts and other things like that. And it was the Inghams who sort of had the idea of opening a pub on the farm, and that was called the Bay Horse. So that's why it's called the Bay Horse Bridge. It crosses across there and then goes up to the Cookridge side, up to the Old Modern. It eventually turns into a tarmac road before it reappears in part of that estate up there. And so let's have a look at this bit of film that takes in both the Nether Springs and the bleach works and the railway line. Because this railway line opened in 1849. I don't know why Horsforth didn't get very ornate entrance, as we'll see that if you've seen on the other side, on the next photograph, we'll see what the Bramhope entrance looks like. Whereas we just sort of got on this side more of a sort of Viking type head over the tunnel. But the odd thing about these tunnel entrances is really the only people who can see it is the driver of the train himself. So let's have a look at this bit of film.
We've asked Richard to show us the spring from where the Nether Springs water was bottled. We're outside the spring here, aren't we, Richard?
Yeah.
That it gets its name from.
Yeah, this is it, yeah. This is where it comes out of my garden. And it's where the cows, you can see where the cows drink here.
Yeah.
So, a bit of free water.
I mean, obviously, with the bottle that you've got here, Richard, is used to bottle the water.
Yeah, apparently so, yeah. So, I mean, this is one that I found behind the mill, just over there, when I was digging one day, years and years ago, and was really surprised to find it. And apparently there is another one somewhere, a different shape.
In the museum.
I've seen a picture of a different shaped one, but that's the only one that I've seen.
Well, in old days, there'd no water in Horsforth, so they had to deliver it. I mean, they must have got it from here and delivered it round the houses at one time.
But there used to be a stone building here. Must have been where they bottled it, between the two trees.
Ah, yeah.
And as a kid, I remember it was half fallen down then. It had all stone, it had a stone roof, and the water came out of that. I've since piped it through my garden a bit, and used a few of the stones. The rest of it all fell down. So I've landscaped it as part of my garden.
Real spring water.
Yeah.
Now they pay up £10
know,
for it, don't they? Anything with some Horsforth Water, Richard.
Yeah.
Just imagine that instead
Yeah.
of milk.
Well, do you want to fill it up?
From here, Richard is taking me to the Owlet flax mill on the other side of the lane. It was first recorded as a mill in 1872. Matthew Pullen was the bleacher here. I suppose it would be right in us thinking that this has been built originally at bleach works and then it's been changed into a flax mill. Do you think so?
I'm not sure.
You think
I'm not
it's
sure.
that way around? Because on the picture, this is there, isn't it? The latter part.
This is, yeah.
When they were drying the flax outside here on the field.
Yeah. It did extend right through where those trees are. For quite a way. It must have been twice the size originally.
And was that stone?
That, I think it was, yeah.
Definitely
yeah.
stone,
The photograph I've seen
Yeah.
from about 1900,
That's right, yeah.
it was stone. So why this bit's brick? I don't know.
That's an excellent. So there were note inside it. Were it
No, well,
no extra floor.
It'd been used for hens. There is a floor in it.
Is there?
Yeah, yeah.
So it's
But
two-storey.
It's two-storey, but it'd been used for hens for a long time before I was born.
Yeah.
And we carried on when the chap left it. We carried on with hens in there until about the late 60s, early 70s. But, it's had pigs in at one time.
That's it.
Yeah. My granddad rented it out to a chap who had pigs in it for 4 or 5 years. And it's been empty really since about 1979. I've used it briefly for storing a few logs in until the roof leaked in too much that they were all getting wet. So no, it's just stood empty now. It's a shame. But,
We've seen an old map, and there has been an earlier flax mill apparently on the other side of the Beck in 1795. Since then, the railway has been pushed through, and this bridge, it's really rather muddy, was built to link Horsforth with Cookridge, called Bay Horse Bridge.
it goes quite a few yards up past those trees there, and it's all built. It's all stoned up, and there's actually a place for drawing water out in that field there.
This is on the two photographs here. This is the Bramhope entrance to the tunnel. Because you can walk actually down to here. I know I've come probably down onto near enough the railway track itself to get the photograph you require. But if you go down from Bramhope down towards Arvington on that very narrow road down there, there's car parking space for 2 on a corner by a gate. And there's a laid out path in there that brings you behind the top of the tunnel, so you can see down onto it, and then the path turns around here, and I've just hopped over the fence then, because it wasn't without loss of life. It cost £500,000 to build the tunnel. It, in 1849 was absolutely enormous sum of money. I guess it wasn't out loss of life. 23 men died in that, and they're commemorated by the Navvies Memorial, which is next to Otley Parish Church. That's the small arcade next to it. It's got a number of shops into it, and there's a bit of a stone path that leads up to it. So that's where that is. It gives the sort of the names of the men and the ages. I think they set off about 17 or something like that, up to sort of people age 50 as well. So it's well worth going down to Otley and having seen that. No doubt you all will have seen that, but that's where you can compare the two entrances next to one another. If that's going to be the Bramhope entrance, the Horsforth entrance certainly doesn't look like that. Perhaps they ran out of money to do that. So the next section we're going to do, because the last section I'll look at today, because there's two bits of film on this as well. I'm coming across from the Grange farm, which is just there, pointed out where the footpath that runs along here and comes out at Owlet farm. And then I'm coming up the track from Owlet farm to Scotland Lane, where there once stood a tannery, which is a small building, which is now a house next to the track up there. So this is a dip on Scotland Lane. So I'm coming across there and going up on the path, or the bit of track that leads up to what was once the Horsforth Waterworks, and ending there. You can see that's the end of the airport runway here, and because just in this vicinity, you've got the landing lights. It's a great place to stand if you want to see planes land right at the end of the runway, because they come down very, very close as well. It obviously depends which way they're landing down there as well. So I'm going to come across it and see these things here. The it's a right of way, all this is, because this is part of the Leeds Country Way, the long distance footpath that goes all the way around Leeds, so there's no problems coming across here. That green bit the other side, that's Horsforth Golf Club. So let's have a look down here. We're going to set down at Owlet Grange, because this is the it was the Cravens had the land round here, because most of these sort of manorial lands they sold to the Stanhopes in 1627. So they really just only had the lands up here off Scotland Lane. And because they continued to live up here in 1675, they built Owlet Grange and farm, sold the house in 1941, and now this sort of farm and its outbuildings have been converted into housing around here. So we've come up here again to speak to two ladies who live in the in this area, one in Owlet Grange itself, and because she had a very unusual story to tell, as we'll see.
This track leads down to both the farm and Owlet Grange. The farm, of course, is Owlet Farm, where I'm going to meet two residents, Sue Gill and Janice Totty. Wonder what it was like when Cravens lived here in 1699. They came here.
My one wish is that I would have been here just for 10 minutes when they were moving in. The morning they moved into this house, I would give anything to have been a fly on the wall and watch them do it.
Would you?
To see the house, how it was when it was brand new.
They said they made the most of the money from tanning,
Yes.
and not from farming. And they owned half of Horsforth. They bought into Horsforth in 1699.
Craven sisters have stood here before the hedge was there, when it was just the ha-ha was to keep the cattle out.
Yeah.
And the little maid,
whereby hangs a tail.
Yes, a long story about the little maid. Is stood
What was that? Come on.
She still lives here.
Well, and from the Craven days.
Yes. She does.
She haunts you, does
Yeah.
she?
No, she doesn't haunt, she just lives with us.
Does she?
She does, doesn't she?
Oh yes,
Yeah,
yes.
she does.
Do you feel the presence
Yeah,
sometimes?
oh yes.
Without a doubt, without a doubt. She's lovely.
How does she appear?
She doesn't appear, you hear the sound of her and you can feel her when it's sometimes cold and miserable and the whole house is warm. She's wonderful.
The rustle of clothes?
Yeah.
Do you?
Honestly, I'm not joking.
No, I believe you. It often happens in houses.
I saw, heard, felt, however you want to describe it, on a number of occasions. I spoke to someone who I've never met before. I had a long conversation, and they knew the people who'd lived here many years ago, and she described exactly the same thing.
Really? Yeah. And do you live all in that house then?
This is my house,
Yeah,
and then we've only just recently converted the barn for my daughter. She lives in that, and that was a cow barn when we first came. When we moved into our house in '72, nobody had lived in it for 2 years.
Haven't they?
The guy had bought it, and his lady friend wouldn't live here, so he sort of farmed it and just left the house empty. And it was freezing, and I was pregnant at the time, and I never took my coat off. We came in the March, I didn't take my coat off till July. And there was no central heating, and these houses, when they get cold, they stay cold.
Well, thanks, it's been smashing as that. We're now leaving the lovely quiet hamlet of Owlet Grange, where we've met Sue and Janice, and as we've just walked past this old building here, part of the hamlet of Owlet Grange is where, as a young lad, I used to come with the first Airedale Scouts in the barn here. We used to use it as a meeting place on a Tuesday night from St James's. From here we're heading now back downwards to the Beck again.
This is, as he mentioned, is that they had a tannery, and this is the building that it used to be in, because it must have been a fairly small affair around here, and because it was sort of probably established around the 1830s, this building. The pit stood the other side of the Beck, so there's one that comes down the valley here, Scotland Beck, behind it, and the pits there. I guess it was another very, very smelly process, because it obviously entailed the skins of animals, and again they had to put them into vats, scrape the hair off them, and then I guess all sorts of noxious substances went into that in order to soften it up into the leather, because it was a big industry when the sort of farming, but required bridles and saddles and other things like that, and obviously the textile industry as well, the belts to drive the machinery. So that's what that little building is down the side there, because it is a public right of way down here, because it's the Leeds Country Way. But we're going to end up here where Horsforth Waterworks are, because you can see, as I showed you on that earlier map, where they were located, the 3 reservoirs up here, and because if you see that, it even says golf course on it. The golf course up here wasn't established, or the Horsforth Golf Club wasn't established until 1906. But these first reservoirs were built up here in 1865. And like a lot of Victorian things, it was a private concern, largely because there wasn't the infrastructure to begin with in the sort of the local boards and town councils and things like that. And they didn't have a great deal of money. And that was one of the sort of problems was. And the Victorians had that idea, is that it should be private enterprise that put up the money for public works. And as I mentioned on a previous talk, is that they put profit to give the shareholders the dividends rather than above the quality of the water that came out here. I mentioned last week is that the doctor to the board complaining that it was dirty, but it needed filtering. There wasn't enough pressure in the pipes, and because it only served the larger houses, so wells were still being used right up into the 1900s. Eventually, the waterworks were bought by the local board, the Urban District Council, in 1901, but they drove a very hard bargain. In fact, they kept putting up the price, and in the end, Horsforth Urban District Council had to pay £49,969 for these facilities, and then obviously invest a lot of money into there to make the mains a lot bigger, to improve the quality of water. So it was a very expensive venture in there. And then in the 1930s is that sort of mains water came into Horsforth. Initially, it came from Barden Reservoir up by Bolton Abbey. So the Town Street area is served by the water from there through Bradford, because Bradford Corporation had the reservoirs built up there. The newer parts of Horsforth are fed by the reservoirs up the Washburn Valley, coming in via Headingley and then pumped out that way. I didn't really know about this until there was a leak in Headingley about 10-15 years ago, and how it affecting Horsforth. It didn't affect me here at the bottom of Town Street, and there's probably a different taste in the waters as well. So that's the waterworks. So just a very short bit of film here. It's only about a minute long. So I'll stop here, and then next week I'll set off down at Ling farm.
We're now almost to the top of the hill by Horsforth Golf Club, where two streams rise. One is Gilbeck, which goes to our left, and the other one to the right, which is Scotland Beck. Now Scotland Beck runs down the side here through this valley, where Horsforth Water Company in 1865 built 2 reservoirs, and then a third one in 1887. Unfortunately, they're all overgrown now, and this is all really we can see, but the golf club is on the other side from where we are now. We're moving off from here now,